Hello, welcome Sunday evening, welcome to Relove Guitars, and I'm an annoyed Sam. I'm in the workshop and just cheesed off beyond belief. I've recently just spent 12 quid or something buying two metallic printed decals to go onto a guitar, and I designed them myself, put loads of time into designing them, got them back. I bought them from Rothko and Frost. I got them back, and then today I decided to put one on this guitar, so I just about gently sanded off the Marlin logo that was on there and cut these and put them on. And I think Rothko and Frost says leave them for 24 hours to dry. Well, I didn't. I left them in a reasonably warm shed for about 4 hours, something like that, and they were completely dry. And then I came out and just went to give them a light dusting of lacquer, and I did it, and then put the can down, came back and went to look for the words, the lettering, the gold lettering, and it was gone. All that was on there was the cat with the hat. And I have looked absolutely everywhere, and with bright lights and everything, and all I can imagine is the first puff of lacquer blew this off, which doesn't really kind of go well for leaving it for 24 hours to dry if it's going to blow off at the first touch of lacquer, which is really bizarre. Anyway, that's really infuriating because that's 6 quid gone somewhere on the floor of the workshop. Anyway, nothing I can do about that, so I'm leaving this one dry for another 10 minutes or so, and then I'm giving it another dusting of lacquer, and I'm going to do it just directly above and let it fall on it so it doesn't blow anywhere. And I'm going to do it with my laser beam specs on so nothing can happen to it. Can't afford to throw another £6 down the drain. Anyway, the reason I'm making this video, a shorter one really, is because Chris in Sheffield, hello Chris, hope you're well, hope your hospital trip was successful and you're feeling okay. But in a video, Chris very kindly made a tool for me to test out, which is for knocking off the nuts off, particularly off Stratocasters and Telecasters. And so he promised to put that in the post, and I'll give it a go. And but one of the things in Chris's video that he asked me about was how to get knobs off guitars. But particularly, he's got an Epiphone Nighthawk, I think it is, which has a push-pull coil split or coil tap, and he's concerned. He's read a few other people's accounts of pulling the knobs off with those kinds of switches, and in his experience, the ones he's read about, they've broken the pot. In other words, the shaft has come right out and left the pot altogether. And it's something that is a risk, and I've had it happen to me on I think my mini pots, perhaps more than the bigger ones. But anyway, so it is a big risk. And Chris asked me if I'd do a little video about how I would remove knobs from pots, and really it's interesting. What I thought I'd do is do a little bit of research beforehand. So I did my usual sort of scoot around the web to see what people had to say, and actually there wasn't an awful lot. I mean, most of the reports said there seem to be several kinds of ways to do it. There is a special tool which you can buy, and as always, good old StewMac. And if I can find an equivalent tool, this isn't exactly right, but let's imagine. You can always buy a tool from StewMac to do the job. Now, it isn't a pair of pliers, right? But if you can imagine an instrument that allows you to put a pair of jaws over the little skirt of the knob, and then it allows you to pull it off with an even pull all the way around. So that's a tool you can buy. But the problem is, it's going to involve pulling upwards against the pot, which is anchored in the body of the guitar. So it isn't going to do away with the force on that shaft on the pot. So that, even if you buy that tool, there is a risk that it's going to, as you pull the pot, it's going to pull the the shaft out of the pot. And that's really seems to be a function of how well the pot's made or how old it is, something like that. So that's one method of doing it. A method I used to use a while back was a bit of another low-tech method. But again, it's, you know, it can be as low-tech as you like as long as it works. What you might do is you might cover up the or protect the area around your pot, and you could give it a couple of layers of masking tape, and you could get some chamfered or edged plastic. You could just sort of get it underneath there. This one probably doesn't will work. Usually there's a bit more room than this, but if you can get it under there, you can get your plastic underneath there. No, it's actually the edge of an old scratch plate. And I can get some plastic under the other side, and then together I can kind of just walk the pot off. Often I've used that, and then you can have something here to protect it. The key thing is always have something on there to protect. Some people like to use spoons, but again, if you use 2 little spoons to lever off the pot, you need to do it equally both sides. What you don't want to do is bend the shaft at all or put more pressure on one side than the other. And you also have to make sure you've got this covered up. I use masking tape because it's quick and you can make it stay where you want it, as opposed to if you try and do it with some cotton or a flannel or a cloth or whatever, it's always going to be moving while you're trying to do your thing with spoons. So that's how I used to do it. A great way that Scott Grove, he of groovy guitar fame, loved and hated in equal numbers. I think he's a pretty excellent guy for a source of information. Rubbed some people up the wrong way, but hey. And he suggested a really good way of doing this is to get a strip of cotton, maybe from a t-shirt. This isn't such a good idea now because it's rolled at the edges and it's suddenly lost its flatness. But if you get a piece of cloth, you can go get the cloth all the way under the knob until you reach the kind of the shaft and it stops. And then what you do is making sure it's still kind of pulling around the or it's not moving away from the shaft. You can then pull it tight over the top, and I don't know if you can see that, and then you can pull away with a single upward pull, and that's a really simple way of doing it. And actually, once it's under there, you can let's get this out of the way. Once it's kind of hooked as far under as it will go, so that as much of the pot plastic, the knob plastic as possible, has got cloth underneath it. What you can do, and this is not behaving itself very well, but what you can do, I found, is if you get it really tightly, pinch it together, and then you're kind of putting your hands nearer the surface, you can sort of use your muscles almost to lever it out at a very controlled rate, rather than a sort of a straight pull. So that's a really useful little tip, and some people use wide laces, some people will use string, whatever. I use this because it gives me a chance to spread it out as far as I can. But the secret is pulling it away out as fast, as cleanly as you can. Actually, one of the things I find, sometimes you'll have a pot that's all the way down, touching the plastic, and believe it or not, the approach that I often take is a double-handed approach, and it's kind of quite bizarre how well it works, right? I grab it one way that way and another way that way, so I'm doing sort of 2 opposite holds with either side of my finger and my thumb, the side of finger and thumb, and believe it or not, you're then pressing your knuckles. Everything's against the I can't show it to you, but everything's against the wood of the body, and when you grab those, you can literally push away. It's very, very controlled, and I've found that more often than not that actually works when it comes away. What you won't succeed, or very rarely succeed in doing, is just trying to pull it one-handed. So two-handed thing with a tight grip and then pushing away and upwards with all your finger muscles can actually, most of the times, does it for me. And I find that's quite controlled because you're really just doing a kind of an opening out movement with your hands. So that's the kind of the standard pot. And I think you probably, I don't know if this is true, but it may be that a normal size or a large pot like this is probably slightly stronger and less likely to pull out. I can't remember having pulled the centre out of a one of these CTS style pots. but you may find that it's more prevalent on the mini ones. But the question that Chris asked was, he's got a push-pull pot, and I guess the question is, what's the difference? Well, the difference is by the time you've pulled it out, let's imagine it's standing much higher out and you can actually see underneath it. Now, I would suggest, and every bit of research I've done suggests, that so long as you start to, whichever technique you're using, whether it's the rope or the shoelace, getting either side, the principle is the same. All you're doing is you're just pulling from a higher place upwards. The end point where your switch is out is still, it's still only holding on by the same strength that the shaft is always holding on, but it's just further out. So in fact, it's kind of easier to get the materials underneath it, whichever you want to do. The key secret, according to all the things I've read, is if you're going to do it whichever way, spoons, masking tape, spoons, cloth, whatever, or two hands, is you just have to do it really only as much as you need, so it's delicate. You've got to just be very cautious. Now the reality is if the thing gives way, it's one of those deals. It's like when you're working on a nut. If you screw it up, you just have to buy another one and put another one in. It's the same with this. Everybody I read has reported at some point, or most people have done, one guitar sometime in their lives, they've done 3 pots. They've pulled the knobs perfectly off all of them, and the 4th one just went ping, and out came the middle, and which meant they had to buy another one and fit it, solder it, and so on. It's just the way it is, depending on the manufacturer and so on. But one of the things I did think was worth thinking about was, if you really want to make absolutely sure of this, the first thing about the push-pull pot is that you can probably see underneath it. Once it's in its out position, you can probably see quite a bit of fresh air. And I don't know, I just did this for a bit of fun, but imagine if you made a little thing like this, and you can see it's a kind of a slightly bent piece of, it's copper, so it's a bit flexible, but I've made it so that you can sort of jam it underneath the collar of this. Now, I could then tape that down if I wanted to, quite firmly, and it will stay in place. Now, if I could get that underneath the switch in its out position, and bearing in mind that I can't recreate it here, but we know there's going to be a hat on there as well. But if you could get that sort of little device under there, then that would give, that would potentially hold down the little shoulder of this shaft quite nicely, and you could pull upwards quite successfully without doing any, even if it didn't work 100%, you'd still be reducing the amount of pull on the shaft itself. So that was just my little quick game with a piece of copper, and all I did was I drilled a hole and then cut along a length, just so I cut across the hole in such a way as it would leave me a kind of collar, and then I put a little bend in it so it would have some sort of strength. And it would just meet up, and you can sort of see, I don't know how well you can see, but if I tape that down now, that would go some way to stopping that shaft moving outwards when I put some upward pressure on it. Again, until I had one of those, unless I have one of those push-pull pots here, I can't recreate that. And I may be talking a load of nonsense. You may not even be able to see enough. But I've seen some photographs, and I'll probably put one on the Facebook page, which suggests that you can see, judging by the in and out position on this particular photograph, suggests you could see far enough under there to get a little device or a little collar under there. What's it going to cost you to try a piece of copper with a bend in it? Tape it down. I mean, if you say, for example, copper is pretty flexible, but let's say I successfully put that under there. You say, well, any pressure is going to bend it. Well, it might do, but if you start to lay on thick a nice sort of bed of masking tape, and by the way, if you're putting it onto lacquer and bodywork, I always recommend the low tack version. But let's say you laid that on pretty heavily and it was all covered up, you might find that that's going to hold it down fairly successfully, and you can then pull upwards, and the copper will arrest the motion of the shaft a little bit. Anyway, Chris, I hope that was a useful thought. But you're not alone. Most people at some point break one. I I'm just suggesting this is if you literally couldn't afford to, or you know, it was too inconvenient to go. Let's say you had a gig tonight and you had to change those knobs, but you didn't have any other spare parts and you had no way of getting one as a replacement, and everything depended on it. And then I would, you know, go to this length and try and mock up something that would slip under there. It maybe you have to set it even lower than I've got here to just get it in the space you've got available once it's set in the split position or whatever the out position is. Anyway, it's worth giving it a go if you've got some sort of flexible material like that you can work with. Okay, hope that was useful. I'm going to get on with trying to put some lacquer on top of this this gold, lovely shiny decal, and in the honest hope that it hasn't taken a walk and disappeared this time. Okay, so I'll see you shortly.